So now that we've planned out a rough version of the scene, in this video we're going to build out the environment for the final version of the scene. Now for most shots you could probably get by with just a 2D background image like we have currently. But we're going to do something more elaborate for the sake of demonstration. We're going to build this scene in 3D. So when you're working with 3D, down here you're going to want to set your stage to at least 2 views. We'll use the right one to view what the camera is actually seeing, and on the left we can use the orbit tool to rotate the workspace and get a 3D view of the scene, and see how our scene elements are positioned relative to the camera, which is this purple thing over here. Now when we're in an orbited view like this, we can use the regular layer transform tool to move our layers along the z-axis if we want. For example, with the globe selected, I can bring that forward so it's closer to the camera. Let's adjust our other view so we can actually see what's happening. Just hold Shift to restrict the thing you're moving to whichever direction you're moving. Or you can take elements like our background and push them farther away. Just remember to also scale things so they appear the right size in the camera frame. But this isn't the background we're actually going to use, so I'll hide that for now. I showed you before that I have a 3D model of the library scene. And to bring that in, I just need to go to File, Import, and I'll do General Import. Originally, I set up this library model in a program called SketchUp that lets you import free 3D models from the SketchUp warehouse. I downloaded a full model of a library and then just cut off the walls to see inside it and added the hallway section. Then I exported it as a .obj file, which is the 3D format that Moho can use. Then it's going to prompt us to create a 3D object layer, and we do want to check scale to Moho. And now it's in the scene, but it's a little small. You can use the layer transform tools on the 3D object layer, like any other, to scale it up. Then we want to position the environment so that our rough animation is positioned correctly. Now something important to understand is that when you have separate layers, even if they're positioned in 3D, Moho doesn't treat them as truly part of the same 3D space. It's always going to render one layer on top of another. So for example, here, even though it seems like Betsy should be in the hallway, she's getting blocked by the library model. To fix that, we need to drag the library model to the bottom of the layer stack. So now she'll always appear in front of it. If you want Moho to do this automatically, you can go in your project settings and check Sort by Layer Depth, and I'll also check Sort by True Distance. So now that we can see her in the hall, we need to move the hall so she starts in the right place and our rough animation will hopefully line up. I can see on the temp background that she should start out 3 windows down the hall. And most importantly, she needs to end up pressed against the wall just before the library entrance. So now that the model is positioned right, let's talk about how it's being rendered. We don't really need to mess with this until we're done animating, but just to introduce these settings, with the model layer selected, if we go to Window and choose Light, we get this control that lets us position the direction the light is coming from that lights this model, as well as the intensity and distance. Now you'll notice Moho does a sort of toon shading effect, which is why the light appears in these bands. To change that, we actually need to go into the material settings. On the layer settings for the model, on the material tab, we have settings for each material in the model. This is a particularly complex model, so there's quite a few. But let's look at the settings for the wallpaper here. I happen to know from making the hallway that this material is Formica Laminate Dark. Now if I change the drop-downs on here to 8 bands instead of 3, there's a slightly smoother look to the toon shading. And you can also change how the material reflects different types of light. Now I'm not going to adjust all of these until later after we have our effects in and do the final color adjustments. Right now we have some more elements to get into the scene. We need to put some scenery outside the windows here. So I'm going to go to File, Import, And this time I'm going to import a Moho object. I have a skyline set up in a different Moho file. And when I do that, it gives me the option to pick the layers to use. I want all of them. And what's nice is when I import them, they come as separate layers. I'm going to put them in a group and then move them back and scale them up. Now I want to spread out the depth of some of these layers a little bit. And I can get rid of the outline on these ground levels. Then I'll adjust the size of each layer so they look good outside the window. Next, I want there to be a little courtyard outside, so I'm going to bring in a garden wall. This time I want to import a vector file, and it's an SVG. Then I'm going to try to position and scale it so it lines up with the actual front side of the library. Now, something you might find when you scale up a vector object is that your strokes get super thick. To fix that, we just need to go to Edit, Normalize Layer Scale. And now that looks right. And I can finish positioning that. Now, one last thing. I want a ground plane outside, so I'll make a vector layer called ground and draw a big rectangle on it. And then in the style palette, I'll set the effect to image texture and use this grass tile image. Then I'm going to use the rotate XY tool to turn the ground so it's flat. Actually, up here I can just type in 90 degrees for the X rotation. Then I just need to position the ground plane. And actually, it looks like maybe I want sort by true distance off. Now that shows up where I want it. And I'll scale the grass texture down to a better size. And then I'm going to put all the contents into a group to make it easy to move the scene around relative to the camera if I need to. Okay, so that's as much positioning as I can do without knowing the final camera angles. So let's put in our camera animation now. These are our camera controls here. So to start, I'm going to use the track camera tool to shift the camera over to where the character starts. Then later, when she's at the library entrance, I'll track the camera over, which makes a keyframe for the camera. I want that keyframe on this frame, actually. And we can see how well that keeps the camera on her. I think I actually want the camera move to start a little later so she has a chance to walk in frame before we start following her. So I'm going to move that starting keyframe a little later. And I think I'm going to change the default interpolation to ease in out. So any camera keyframes I create now will have that easing. Then I'll keep adding tracking keyframes as she enters the library and comes to a stop. Then the plan is to do a zoom in to a close-up as she approaches the globe. So I need to position the globe layer to make that work. Then I can use the zoom camera tool to get tighter on her and the globe. I also think I might want to try using the pan tilt tool here to give us more of an upshot. That gives us a better look at the library, and we may as well take advantage of the fact that we have a 3D set and can move the camera like this. Okay, so that walk-up looks good, and she's at the right place in the frame for all these parts of the stopping animation. Now I'm realizing there's an issue with the library model. It has this post in the foreground here at the entrance, and there's no way to make Betsy go behind it without going behind the whole library. I could edit the model to cut that out, but I think we can solve that with some creative camera work in a minute. For now, I think I want to go back to the beginning and zoom in there as well, and also make it a bit of an upshot. I think I want to start out focused on the window and then let Betsy walk into frame. We want to make sure the camera gets wide by this point so we can see all the nice full body poses. And then when she stops at the entrance, I want to zoom in closer. I'm going to go in far enough that we don't cross the foreground post. Then I'm going to go into the motion graph for the camera and smooth out the curve so the speed changes are more subtle. And then just a little adjustment to the zoom curve. And now we're ready to do our camera trick. We're actually going to turn this into two separate shots. On the very next frame after the point we stopped here, I'm going to swing the camera all the way to the other side of the doorpost, and then zoom in on the face to make the shot different enough that it doesn't feel like a jump cut. There, now it just looks like it's cutting between two separate shots. Then we'll slowly pull out as she enters and looks around, and then hook back up with the animation we did for the zoom in on the walk up. So now that we have our camera positioned, I'm going to adjust the background so we can actually see some of that cityscape. And now let's hit Command R to do a render. And this is what the scene is going to look like. I think we can enhance this by enabling depth of field to push the background out of focus. That will keep the viewer's focus on the character. Let's go to the project settings and turn on depth of field. If we check how that looks, it looks like the character is actually out of focus. If we look at the 3D view, we can see now that we have this box to indicate the depth of field effect. The line in the center is the distance from the camera that is in focus, and the square is the range that stays in focus. Beyond that, things will start to get blurred based on their distance from the camera. So let's go back to the project settings and adjust the focus distance until it's on the character. I think I also want the blur radius lower so the blur isn't as extreme. I think 6 will actually be best. Now when I render, it looks like this. I think that will look good. So now we can see how the shot looks with the camera move. Great, I think that's going to work. Now the next step is to replace the rough animation with our actual character rig. We'll start doing our final character animation in the next video. I'll see you there.